great. You know, what's funny is we were talking all about the Super Bowl. What'd you like? What was this? Was this good? Was this bad? And I was telling Dave the most entertaining thing about the Super Bowl for me was following you on Twitter, just torturing Chiefs fans. Just I showed him the one about the guy who called you a know nothing, and I was showing Dave all this stuff. Just such great delight. I was reading along with you and the Chiefs fans. How much fun was that for you?
Oh, it was a blast. I mean, I was watching that game like the Broncos were playing it. I was so I mean, it wasn't even that I was rooting for Philly. I was rooting so hard against the Chiefs. And it just brought me so much joy, miserable they were and how bad they got their butts whipped. It was just I couldn't have been happier. Like, I don't know what that says about me, but I was bouncing around the apartment. I'm like, man, this is so right. Just watch it when Patrick Mahomes like sulks off the field, just lip dragging, and Travis Kelce, has got tears in his eyes. Man, I took great pleasure in that. It was one of the great Super Bowls I've ever had the opportunity to watch.
Well, so where did this all begin? Like, take us back to, because you know what? By the way, Mahomes, I just was looking on that Cooper DeJean pick six. Not great effort out of Patrick Mahomes. And I know he's a quarterback, and I don't expect him to stalk him down like a linebacker. But yeah, where did this all begin? I know we played in the AFC West at one point.
Yeah, well, that was part of it. Then they beat the Broncos 16 straight times, and it was like, that it was like a cat on the porch playing with a half-dead mouse. There wasn't a lot of effort, and it just got to the point where it was annoying because I really like Andy Reid, and I actually enjoy Patrick Mahomes, and it just became this thing where they just seem to get all the calls and everything goes their way and they're just so good. And Patrick Mahomes this and Patrick Mahomes that. And it just got to be, they just got to be like this insufferable person that you just can't stand anymore, just the organization in general. And so it wasn't any one thing. It was just like this litany of things that happened over the course of time that just created this white hot intensity inside me that just burned like 1,000 suns. And so I just really, really went in. And then their fans, when you talk about a bunch of whining, just weasels. I mean, their fan base is like, if I was their fan base, like I'd have a lot more respect for you if you just go, hey, you know what? We lost one. Who cares? I mean, we're so good. We'll be back. Like I would, like I've told you guys this, I'm a really gracious loser, but I'm an absolute jerk when it comes to winning. And the fact that you guys have won so much and you'll whine about stuff. You want to talk about lack of effort. Go watch Travis Kelce block people, or go watch on the fumble that Patrick Mahomes had that he recovered. Go watch Travis Kelce hold a lantern. I mean, he was just holding the lantern going, boy, it looks dangerous over there. And where you guys are playing football, you're just shining a light on it. Like, wow, look at that. There's a lot of action over there. I'll just stand over here and do nothing while you take a beating. I mean, it was horrendous. So, yeah, that added to my pleasure. So, yeah, I just had a great Super Bowl Sunday.
Well, I thought the thing that stood out the most to me, Mark, and I don't know if you ever got this rating from a coach, they would write something down on each play. Like there was always the NRP, not ready to play. And I look at the offensive line. I mean, they were rushing four, I think, almost every time. And it just looked like I saw Creed Humphreys try to go out and block. I think it was Josh Sweat. And then you saw your boy Kelce you were talking about. He had a chip block on him, and it was terrible. I mean, he didn't even touch him. He just brushed jerseys with him. But it just looked like they were playing at a different speed to me.
Yeah, on that one, Travis Kelce was like he completely missed the snap count. And the one advantage you have as an offense, I mean, I'm fat, slow, broken, all those things. Like at least I have the snap count. Like you can't miss the snap count.
Yeah.
Right? That's the one advantage you have. You're 100% right. And I look at the offensive line getting just run through, but I also put it on Andy Reid. Like as a coach, like I don't want to hear that you couldn't run the ball. Hey, we didn't convert any third down, so it's hard to establish the run. Really, because you guys were 3 for 11 on third down. The Eagles were 3 for 12 on third down. You do realize that, right? And yet Saquon Barkley, well, we didn't average enough yards per carry, so we weren't being successful. Really? Because Saquon Barkley ran it 25 times for 2.3 yards per carry. Like, you chose not to do it, Andy. And it's the same thing that happened to you in that Tampa Bay Super Bowl. They were inviting you to run it for 7 yards a carry. And you're like, nah, it's not really how I like to win. And just playing offensive line, when somebody is rushing you like that, man, you got to take the starch out of that guy, right? If they're getting an upfield rush on you and they're just bringing, I mean, they're just turning loose the dogs. You got to let a guy up the field and trap him or wham him with a tight end or a guard coming across on a shorty, or, motion a tight end from outside to in and just earhole that defensive end and pitch the ball outside of him. There are ways that you deal with people who are penetrating, people who are just basically pass rushing you. And the Kansas City Chiefs did none of it. They just flat weren't interested in it. So Andy Reid completely got out coached. And I will say this for all you people driving around in Seattle right now, the youngsters out there, the youngins, the ones that call me a boomer or old head. That's the term they like to use.
Old head.
The old head,
Yeah.
old head, right? Let me tell you something. About football in general. There are things, when you call me, hey, this old head, the game's passed you by. Let me tell you something that never goes in and out of style. It's not vogue one year and out of vogue the next year. That's whooping somebody's ass. That never goes in and out of style. I don't care who your quarterback is. If you dominate the line of scrimmage, you win in the NFL. That's just the way it works. And the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely dominated the Kansas City Chiefs on the line of scrimmage, both defensively and offensively. And that's why they're world champions. And that's why they just ran through the Kansas City Chiefs.
Well, and what made it so effective in terms of what Philadelphia did? They didn't blitz. That was a big talking point. Is they rushed for the entire game, no blitzes. This Kansas City O-line had been good this year by all accounts. So, and you talked about them not seeming interested. Was it were the Eagles doing anything that you didn't see before in the way they were mixing it up or confusing the line? It just seemed weird that when you're rushing for, it's not an exotic blitz coming and they didn't see this or weren't prepared for that. It seemed fairly basic, yet they were absolutely destroyed, as you said.
Yeah, Bob, I think two things. They tied the back end together with the front end really well. So they played, they played almost 100% zone, but they did a great job of disrupting routes off the line of scrimmage, like basically riding the guy for 5 yards before you let him off. So all those quick throws that Kansas City has been really just hitting on a bunch, and they did a bunch in the AFC Championship game. Those throws were taken away initially. And then that D-line, they just turned them loose. And, man, when you don't have to worry about anything, like, as a D lineman, those guys are dumb. We've talked about it, right? They're not real bright, but you don't have to read anything. You just can pin your ears back and go to town. One thing about D linemen, that's like, sharks in the water, and Patrick Mahomes is like a big bag of chum back there. And you just let him tee off on you. If I was a player in that situation, man, I'd be pissed. I would be so irritated. And I'd be coming off the sideline, dog cussing somebody about the way we're calling plays right now. You give up 6 sacks in a game. Yeah, your offensive line struggled, but your coaching staff sucked. They were awful in that game.
Yeah, I used to say that to defensive linemen. Like, you either go straight, right, or left. 3 choices. But do you think, every year it seems like the Super Bowl kind of sets some kind of a trend, and we talk about this this draft that's coming up, that it's more of a meat and potatoes. Like, you see lots of offensive linemen, and as far as the projections go, is that kind of the message that's coming out of this Super Bowl, that's how the way Howie Roseman built that team with interior offensive and defensive linemen, and do you think that's going to be kind of the fashionable thing to do going forward?
Well, if you're willing to work, yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of teams just aren't, right? So, you know how this works, Dave. There's so many teams that get enamored by athleticism. And I always say it, like, playing football is easy for football players. It's hard for athletes. And so many times we get so enamored. The easiest thing in the world to see is athleticism. I mean, people look at athleticism. The people who are just fans, they look at athleticism. That's easy to see on film, right? You can see a guy run fast and jump high and do all that stuff,
Right.
and you equate that to being a good football player. There are plenty of great athletes that play in the NFL that aren't very good at playing football. I want great football players. And it's easy to sit there and say, hey, this is great, man. They're doing a great job with that. But the truth of the matter is not only you have to draft those guys, but more importantly, you've got to develop those guys in a situation where you really don't get to practice like we used to practice. And, I'll tell you, like when the Philadelphia Eagles a couple of years ago, they drafted Cam Jurgens, their center, who's an outstanding center, I think second round with out of Nebraska. And at the time, they had Jason Kelce playing at all pro level. And so normally what happens when you miss in the draft, you're chasing positions, right? So if you miss 3 or 4 times, like let's call it an edge guy, or let's call it a linebacker, or let's call it offensive lineman, and you keep chasing offensive linemen, you chase them and you chase them, and you just can't find one or you can't develop one. And meanwhile, for 2 or 3 years, you had strength in your defensive line, for instance. And then all of a sudden, what happens? Guys leaving free agency, guys get hurt, guys retire. And now you've got two positions of weakness because you didn't bolster the defensive line. You didn't use any assets on the defensive line because you were busy chasing offensive linemen who can't play. And now, instead of one position of weakness, now I have two positions of weakness. And bad teams, it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy where they keep chasing the same player over and over and over again and hopes they'll hit. And they either aren't drafting the right guys or they're not very good at developing guys. And so it's, there's two situations there. You look at Jeff Stoutland, who's the offensive line coach in Philly. The dude is considered, and he's awesome. He's one of the best, if not the best offensive line coach in football. And it shows in the way those guys play and the way those guys prepare.
Hey, so what you brought up Travis Kelce, and we talked about him the other day. I mean, he's going to be 36 years old this coming season. I mean, he's had a tremendous career, but it was a down year in the regular season for him. Do you think we're looking at somebody who's a bit washed, that he could be elsewhere next year? Maybe he retires. Do you think he's well beyond his prime, or how do you see this team? Is it going to be a decidedly different looking Chiefs team next year, and some of the Hopkins and Kelce and people like that who are a bit older may not be there?
Yeah, well, Hopkins already said to Andy Reid that he's going to retire, so he's done. And Travis Kelce is going to make $19 million next year. I just don't think you can pay him that. Like, and he becomes so one dimensional because, he's an automatic tell. He's like the movie Rounders when Teddy KGB is eating Oreo cookies. So, he comes out there, he ain't blocking anybody. You can't put him on the front side. You can't put him as a lead, the point at tight end. So you either got to run him on the backside to cut people off where he doesn't really have to do anything, or you got to split him out. And so he becomes an automatic tell for an offense that, hey, man, they're throwing the football. And so I'm not going to say that he's washed. He didn't play well on Sunday. I mean, he was awful. And ultimately, he had 2 weeks to prepare and to rest. So I think it started with that suit he wore to the game. Did you guys see that thing? It looked like, oh my gosh, Google that thing. That thing was straight out of, you're younger than me, Bob, but that thing was straight out of Starsky and Hutch. I mean, he looked like Huggy Bear's informant in that thing. That thing was right out of the 70s. I mean, it was god awful. And the worst part, not only did you come in that suit, you showed up in that suit, then you played the game you played, you got your ass kicked, and then you had to put that suit back on to leave that stadium. You should have just wrapped the towel around yourself and walked out of there. Like, you should have hightailed it out, because that thing, you should burn that. I mean, that thing is bad. That is awful. Just awful.
How do you think Mark would like the teddy bear pants that DK wore? DK wore a pair of jeans that the entire front of the pants had little stuffed teddy bears sewn to them, and not on the back, so it kind of looked like chaps, but there was all just little stuffed teddy bears down the front of these pants that we looked up, and they're like $700 pants or something like that.
Right.
Did you ever see those?
That way you can but that way you can point to the bear and say, hey, point on the bear where the bad man hurt you. If you didn't have a good game. So you could just, right here is where it hurts. No, I did not see those pants.
You got to Google those. It's quite a sight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm thinking Mark's probably like us that he shops at Costco. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what those things were, man. I had never seen anything like that. But yeah, everybody's going. That's a good point about him having to leave there in that suit. But what do you think about Jalen Hurts? I mean, he's obviously the MVP, and there was some backlash. I thought it was interesting that there were people that were criticizing him because he was being too careful with the ball. And I've never heard of that before,
Right.
because they were saying, hey, there were opportunities for him to throw the ball downfield. And, there's that little thing with, was it A.J. Brown? I think that,
Yeah.
they supposedly had a rip. But I've always loved that kid. And I've, the fact that he is a big weightlifter and he's a super strong guy and he just works hard. He's very kind of stoic almost afterwards. Here he is, the MVP. But as far as his performance this year, what did you make of that criticism? And then I felt like he was a great Super Bowl MVP.
Right. Hey, one of my greatest broadcasting accomplishments is one time I made him smile in a meeting.
Oh, really?
Like I saw Jalen Hurts' teeth, and I was like, I'd never seen him before. I'm like, what are those things hanging out of your mouth?
Yeah.
I mean, he is that stoic, and he's that serious about football. Um, And one of the things I really like him too, Dave, and he makes a lot of decisions. Like one, I think at the end of last season, he threw so many picks and he was kind of careless with the football. They were like really early in the season going, hey, if you don't turn the ball over, we just don't lose. And there were a couple times early in the season when they started off 2-2, where I thought he was a little too careful. There were some wide open guys that he just chose not to throw it to, chose not to take a shot. And so there was a balance there. But like you said, managing the game, I don't look at that as a derogatory term. It's become somewhat of a derogatory term, but I don't think of it that way. And the thing I love, and it's the way this team has been built, and we'll see if they can sustain that. But I'll go back to the NFC Championship game, and Saquon Barkley's out of the game, and Shipley breaks one for about 70 yards. And the first guy running off the bench, no helmet, nothing, to celebrate, he's jumping around, is Saquon. And it reminds me of my favorite thing about Jalen Hurts. So Jalen Hurts takes a team to the national championship. They lose, goes back, gets benched. They put in Tua. Tua throws a touchdown. And the first guy running down the sideline to celebrate that touchdown like he threw it himself was Jalen Hurts. And there are very few places in life where you'll celebrate somebody else's success like it's your own, other than your own kids, right? When somebody else like somebody else at the station, gets a raise or gets a job that you wanted or whatever, to their face, you're like, hey, congrats. You really earned it. And then you walk around to the coffee room and go, like that guy sucks. So I'm way better than that guy, right? Like that's how life works in general. And in football and in sports, it's not that way most of the time.
Yeah.
And you could sit there and like for most people, Jalen Hurts, like you just got benched in a national championship game or whatever it was, semifinals, whatever it was. And your backup comes in and you're 25-2 going into that game. Your backup comes in and throws a touchdown, leads you to a championship. You're never playing there again. You're going to have to leave Alabama. And yet to have that kind of relationship with Tua and to be able to celebrate the freshman, I just thought that points to something special in that guy's character, because most of us would be on the bench moping, feeling sorry for ourselves. And so those are some things that I just absolutely love about Jalen Hurts. And he makes a ton of decisions, the RPO game, the zone read game, whether I hand the ball off, whether I keep the edge, whether I throw the bubble screen, all those things. Like those things we don't give any credit to quarterbacks for, but there's a lot of decision-making process in that has nothing to do with throwing the ball. And then when he's asked to throw the ball, man, you saw it in the game, man, he made some unbelievable dime pieces in that game.